So I must say that I find the process of speaking into a camera to be somewhat strange, and I find it somewhat awkward. And I guess the reason is simple enough. Um, as humans, when we talk, we're usually talking in the presence of another human being who is there, giving us information with their body language, with the way that they attend, and with the way in which they respond, and the way in which the conversation, the dialogue flows. Talking in that context is much different from talking in a monologue like this, kind of out to an unspecified audience. Actually, who I'm speaking to is somewhat enigmatic. I don't fully know. I have some sense of who my audience is, but even so, it's more abstracted than speaking to a very specific person in real life. So that said, I wanted to share a bit of a commentary on the project of YouTube and the project of this YouTube channel. So I wanted to get a bit existential about the YouTube channel itself. And I wanted to share with you some thoughts about my relationship to YouTube, my relationship to these videos, and a bit of a reflection on like what I'm doing with it and why. And I appreciate that maybe no one is interested in this topic at all, in which case that's fine. But perhaps this is interesting, and in which case, thank you for watching. So, YouTube, what on earth is it? So, I guess the first thing about YouTube is like it's kind of a novel technology, so it's new, and thus I don't know how well I understand it or we as a culture understand it. What is it? It's a platform, it's a media platform for sharing video content. And video content can be consumed on like a mobile or a laptop. You need to be kind of digitally engaged to consume video content. And you might just need your ears to listen, or you might prefer an audio visual experience where you're sitting down and you're watching and you're attending to the video. And so my YouTube channel in particular is if you can just look back on the videos, you just click out of this video and look back on the videos, is a bit of a journey. It's a bit of a personal journey, and it's a journey tracking. I guess I see it as a blog, a documentation of moments in my life, ideas that I have encountered, thoughts which have struck me as particularly salient and compelling and interesting. But it's also kind of a journey of me, I guess, a young man in my 20s. As I mature, the last few years of content on this channel has been an exploration of what I would call broadly spiritual ideas. So, for example, there are several videos related to the Western esoteric tradition, in particular the tradition of alchemy. I did a video on Kabbalah as well. There's videos on Carl Jung's ideas, the psychologist, the 20th century psychologist Carl Jung, who was someone who was interested in Western esotericism. And really, I was interested in these ideas. Why? I was interested in these ideas, I suppose, because my soul, I was hungry in my soul for kind of spiritual nourishment. And I had gone through a kind of starvation of my soul in my earlier 20s, maybe a few years before some of the first videos on this channel. And I'd gone through a period of rather intense nihilism and despair and depression, which was all connected to a sense of meaninglessness, a sense that nothing in my life truly mattered, that at the end of the day, there was nothing like real in which it was grounded, nothing. It's hard to say exactly, but all of the projects towards which I was working, there was no ultimate end to them, or there was no ultimate purpose to them. There was no ultimate framework in which they all sat. Which is kind of how I felt in my early 20s. And the alchemists had this term, the blackening of the matter, where the Spanish mystic John of the Cross would call it the dark night of the soul. And I have had my dark night of the soul. And it was a rather intense experience. And I think that in a way, the whole narrative arc of this channel is a response to that crisis of meaning, which I felt in my early 20s, about, what's it, 2021, about 7 years ago. I'm going to be 28 this year. Yeah, it was around the age of 21, 22 that I was undergoing this bit of a noisy background. I was undergoing this crisis of meaning, this crisis of values, and this crisis of purpose, this crisis of direction, this dark night of the soul. And so, I was spiritually starving in my soul. My soul hungered for some nourishment, something to sustain it, and there was nothing. Even though outwardly, if you'd have taken a snapshot of my life at that time, there was perhaps not a great reason to despair. So it might have been hard for people looking in at that to truly understand what was going on within, which was part of the despair, actually, was the alienation of the inwardness of the experience, that no one could truly see or understand what was going on. Anyway, so it's been a journey of healing, I would say, first and foremost, from there, the last 7 years for me. And that has been a process of reflection and a process of study and a process of thinking and a process of seeing what there is, which is spiritually sustaining, seeing what there is truly that is a kind of bread of life. And so I turned to the East. I turned to Buddhism, to Zen Buddhism in particular, the Japanese Buddhist tradition, and spent many hours staring blankly in meditation. And this had a great effect upon me. It calmed my mind. It slowed down and settled my mind. And indeed, it helped me to access a consciousness, a state of awareness, a place which was fully outside of this whole crisis of meaning, this whole story of what my life means, what my purpose is. This rut that I was in was somehow transcended through Zen, to the degree that I was able to see my thoughts from a new place. And I was able to say, okay, these are thoughts, and these thoughts are tyrannizing me to a degree. These thoughts are, they are my jailers, you know. And so getting that perspective through Zen, through meditation, upon my thoughts was very important for me. And so I spent some time imbibing a kind of Buddhism which helped calm me and helped me find peace. And yet the Buddhism did not fully scratch the itch. It did not fully satiate me. It did not fully provide the meaning for which I was searching. Because at the heart of Buddhist metaphysics, we could say, is the notion that the self is unreal. Indeed, the self is an illusion, a form of Maya, and that the center of my being is nothing. It's void. It's vast emptiness, actually. And this didn't actually help with the nihilism, because there is a meaninglessness at the core of Buddhism, I think. And we are called in Buddhism to embrace and accept and come to terms with the non-reality of the self and the purposelessness of these thoughts which we identify as the self or the ego. So whilst Buddhism had a profoundly calming effect upon me and reoriented my consciousness, my awareness in some powerful ways, it failed to provide the meaning which I was after. And what do I mean when I say that word meaning? It's hard to say entirely, but it's just that when I'm navigating my life, I'm waking up and doing the daily things that one does as a human being, the navigation of life, the operating in that space, it lacked meaning. That's all I can say. I don't know if I can do better than just say that and hope that that you know what I mean by that. So beyond Buddhism, where then did I look? Well, through reading the writings of the psychologist Carl Jung, I stumbled across some very interesting ideas from Jung. And Jung's whole psychology revolved around the idea that the natural processes of the psyche, of the mind, were oriented towards wholeness, which is the word he used. He thought that the self, which for Jung is an archetype, a deep pattern, and therefore not unreal, like the Buddhists would say the self is no self, no mind, like nothing. Whereas Jung would say that the self is actually a very objective thing, like it's a psychological reality, the self. And he would demonstrate this through the paintings of his patients and through artworks and things like this, the mandalas, which is actually a Buddhist symbol, the mandalas. So the mandalas, the circles with the central points. Jung saw all of this as a symbol of the self, a symbol of wholeness, a symbol of unity. And Jung saw this as a telos, an aim towards which our psyche was maturing. So we mature into wholeness. And that the struggles of our life were the working through of the tension of opposites, which were trying to be reconciled and integrated into the personality. So our persona, the masks we wear each day, and the shadow, the values which are cast out in the shadow of those masks, these values needed to be reconciled and integrated and formulated at a higher level. So Jung was just a revelation to me, an absolute revelation to me, because he revealed the reality of the psyche, would have been the terms that he used, the sense in which he took the psyche seriously. He took that interiority, which I had been so afflicted by, this nihilism, but this interiority, the sense that no one can see my soul, no one can know what is in my heart, and that is quite an alienating thought if if you're feeling lonely. So Jung took the psyche, took the soul seriously, and true to the word psychologist, student of the soul. Jung was a student of the soul, and he took the notion of the soul very seriously and documented the archetype of the self. And so he was saying, look, no, what you're going through is real, what you're going through is universal, the breakdown of meaning, the struggle to integrate certain values, the struggle towards wholeness. These patterns are very real, and they're actually very universal, and that this is a very universal human experience. And so Jung helped to contextualize and situate my own story, my own existential struggle within a broader narrative. He helped to broaden it out and to show how cultures since the dawn of time have mapped this same territory that I was operating within, this psychic territory, the territory of the mind, the territory of the soul. He was saying this is real, there are real patterns to it, it's been documented, here's all of the evidence, and here's how this is healing, and here's where you're at, and I understand it. It was kind of the gist of what I got from reading Jung. But also, this fundamental difference from Buddhism, where he's saying the self is real. It actually has this archetype, the self, without going too far into the Jungian psychology, but it suffice to say that he has a positive conception of the self, and whereas the Buddhist might have a negative conception in the sense of negating it. The self is not real. For Jung, the self is real. For the Buddhist, the self is not real. Let me put it this way. So that's a paradigm shift for me, a big paradigm shift. And I'm saying, okay, the self is real, the dark night of the soul is real. That's actually an existential pattern, a psychological pattern, a universal psychological pattern. Okay. And so meaning starts to then flood in through Jung, who is acknowledging this pattern, acknowledging this suffering, and then broadening out my conception of who I am, broadening out my story, and it opens out now into a more collective story. And so the more I looked at Jung, the more I was interested in what Jung was interested in. And Jung wrote 3 books, I think, perhaps more, on alchemy. So he wrote Alchemical Studies, Psychology and Alchemy, and Mysterium Conjunctionis. And these 3 books dealt with this topic of alchemy. And it's just fascinating because the thing is, Jung had already impressed me. It left an impression upon my mind so deep and so resonant. I was like, this person is revealing some very deep insights to me about the mind and about our being in the world. And so I endeavored to look at what Jung was looking at, and what Jung was looking at was alchemy, and in particular the expression of alchemy. Well, actually, he looked at from early Hellenistic alchemy, from Zosimus of Panopolis, I think he's called, was a Greek living in Alexandria who had some early writings in the 3rd or 2nd century AD. So early stuff, all the way through to kind of medieval alchemy, the alchemy of Michael Meyer and Gerhard Dorn and figures like this. And so and that's perhaps where the richest body of alchemy is in medieval alchemy or kind of early modern alchemy. But then it starts to transition into chemistry and actually become denigrated, and the alchemical tradition kind of dies in the kind of like mid 18th century or something like that. Anyway, so you've got this alchemical tradition, which is something, even this is something I thought was just like mind-blowing. You've got this kind of tradition of thought which is spanning from the 2nd to 3rd century AD. It spanned almost 2,000 years, right? 1,500 years or something like that. It's a long time for a body of thought to exist. And this body of thought actually, so it existed through multiple cultural contexts and had this, it had this subtlety to it, actually, this way in which it existed, which I found very enchanting. Because, the aim of alchemy was the production of the philosopher's stone. And this philosopher's stone is like a mythic image, actually. It's kind of like the holy grail of the Grail myths and the philosopher's stone. These are kind of mythic images of the Western tradition, which are very, very powerful. The first Harry Potter book is about the philosopher's stone, and so it's some magical object with a deep mystery and mythic resonance. Let me just say it like that. So all of these factors kind of made me fascinated about alchemy. The fact that Jung had impressed himself so deeply upon me and had impressed me so much with his wisdom, and that he was studying alchemy. And then you just look at the stuff, you look at some of the alchemical art, you look at some of the strangeness of the ideas, and the way that the alchemists talked about the transformation of their matter and the production of their stone. You just thought, what on earth are these people talking about? And yet in it, Jung was tracing something. Well, tracing something, let me put it that way. I wasn't sure what it was exactly he was tracing. That was part of my journey to understand it. And so, like, a lot of the early videos on my channel that you can still see now are from talks that I did on alchemy as I was reading Jung, as I was exploring these ideas myself, as I was synthesizing Jung's psychology and learning what his kind of psychological system meant, and then integrating that with this rich symbolic stream of alchemy, and kind of going through it intuitively, trying to find my way and trying to understand what it all meant. And all of this was a very enchanting experience. It brought magic into the world. It brought meaning into the world for me. It was like kind of an awakening of sorts. It was a kind of elevation of my consciousness, or I don't know if I want to say that. It was a kind of like remembering. How I would say it, it was kind of like an awakening of my imagination, which had been dormant. And it was a connection of that imagination to the imagination of my ancestors, to these medieval alchemists, to this older story. And there was this older story which had a living resonance and which was enchanting, was exciting, was magical, was fascinating. And that was my study of alchemy. And alchemy still interests me. Or Hermeticism, the Hermetic philosophy, is another way to formulate and understand what alchemy is. Anyway, where's my thread going with this? So there's a philosophy there in alchemy, in Hermeticism, the Hermetic philosophy, and it was enchanting and fascinating and offered a meaning, but was it the meaning I was looking for? So I think, like, what's happened is, like, I've kind of explored alchemy to the degree that I'm able to. Well, there's loads more to explore, but it's a kind of dead tradition, actually, alchemy, because you don't have alchemists living today, really. But you did for 1,500 years, which is something to acknowledge and to appreciate. But it's not a living tradition. It's actually a dead tradition. And to understand it, I had to go through a kind of process of trying to resurrect a dead spirit, a culture, to resurrect a culture which was dead and not living. And so there's a kind of necromancy to that, you know, the awakening magic which awakens the dead. And that kind of is something I've learned about alchemy, because alchemy is also connected to shamanism, and shamanism is connected to the journeying into the domain of the dead and calling upon spirits in that realm, calling on their power, really. So shamanism and alchemy are two things that I've studied a fair amount. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on them. I would just say I was quite intensely interested in them. And yet, I suppose I lost interest in them because ultimately what I learned was that they're not they're not stories that I can inhabit and live within. And there is not a clear continuity between these traditions and my life. Even though there's a lot of rich insights, a lot of, I would say, wisdom. There's insight, wisdom, there's riches, I think, within these traditions, which I don't want to deny. I think there absolutely are riches within the alchemical and shamanic traditions, because they're kind of like both spiritualities. They're kind of like hidden spiritualities or ancient spiritualities, and that fascinated me so much, especially as someone who was starving for meaning in the modern world. Who wouldn't find these ancient traditions enchanting and alluring? So where am I at now? Well, I have basically gone through a kind of conversion to Christianity. But even saying that doesn't feel fully right to me, but I guess it's the best way to articulate it. Like, let me put it this way, I'm convicted of the spiritual dimension of reality. And I think alchemy, shamanism, Carl Jung, the awakening of my imagination and the awakening of my intuition, these things have convicted me that there is a spiritual reality, a spiritual dimension at work in the world, behind the scenes of what is visible and manifest and immediately apparent to our senses. This much I feel sure of. But then the problem becomes a problem of worship, really, because if that's true, then what spiritual entities are we in relationship to? What like, if it's true that there is a spiritual dimension behind what we can see, touch, taste, and feel, then the question becomes, what is the nature of that reality, and how is it best navigated? And what is the way in which we are supposed to relate to that reality? And so then this led me into thinking about topics like angels and demons, the idea that there would be spiritual principles which are benevolent and good, and that there are spiritual principles which are malevolent and bad and evil. And in the Christian vision of the world, they have a lot to say about angels and demons and the spiritual hierarchy about the nature of the spiritual hierarchy. Let me put it that way. And so I use the word conversion to Christianity because conversion, I think, means something similar to repentance, which is another Christian word. And both conversion and repentance mean turning. And so I was faced in a certain direction with the Western esoteric tradition, with alchemy, with shamanism, and I turned, converted, and repented into another direction. And that direction is the best way I can describe it is that direction is the direction of praising God, like praising the spiritual principle, which is the highest, which is the ground of the good, which is the ground of the true, which is the ground of the beautiful, which is the source of all spiritual power, and which is ultimately ineffable and ultimately transcendent. So the question of God is, of course, a big one, and a controversial one, no doubt, in our modern times. But I'm speaking personally in this whole video, of course. Like, the thing for me is that I realized that I was worshipping demons through the study of alchemy, through the study of shamanism, and through the exploration of these unconventional spiritual paths, which were much richer than a kind of nihilistic despair. Of course, they were a step forward from the nihilistic despair. And so from when I was there, they had such meaning. And I'm sure there is still meaning and insight, as I've mentioned, in these traditions. But I was devoted to them. They were like the thing I was unconsciously praising and kind of like sacrificing to. Like, I wasn't doing any satanic rituals or anything like that, but like, it's a subtle thing what a demon is. It's a subtle thing what an evil spirit is, and a big part of how these spirits have been conceptualized is their capacity for deception, their capacity to seduce us. And that's all I can say, is that I realized that a lot of this spirituality, which I was unconsciously embodying, was a worshipping of lower spiritual entities. Spiritual entities, yes. Spirits, yes. That's better than meaninglessness and despair and being cut off from the spiritual dimension. But nonetheless, they were not necessarily good spirits. And so then repenting of that just means turning away from that to just turning away from that is good enough. Turning away in the other direction. And so the other direction from that is something like the transcendent Godhead, like the spiritual power which is above all spiritual powers, the source of all spiritual powers, the source of all being, the ground of all being. That seems like the proper object of worship. Because, I do think that we are all living religious lives, whether we see ourselves as doing that or not. We all have our patterns of veneration, our patterns of worship, our patterns of sacrifice, our patterns of purity. Like, we have religious behavior, religious thinking, religious feeling. It's right at the core of our being. It's right at the core of how we are as human beings. That's my belief, that's my thought, which is not original, it's not mine. It's like, predominantly I think I got the idea from Jung and also Mircea Eliade, the historian of religions, who wrote an amazing book called The Sacred and the Profane, which mapped the reality of the religious, the phenomenology of religion, or phenomenology of religious experiences very, very profoundly and amazingly, that book. But anyway, that's the premise I'm operating from, because this dark night of the soul is a spiritual malady. Nihilism is a spiritual malady. It's a spiritual disease. It's not a material disease. It's a spiritual disease, a malaise of the soul, the dark night of the soul. It's real. It's a place I've been. And it's not just about me. Like, I know that if I've been there, that hundreds, thousands of people in the world have been there and might be there now. And, if my words can reach those people, and just point to, to help someone in that place see what that means and how to navigate such a place and how to potentially transcend it and move beyond it. That would give me great joy if I'm able to do that. It would be redemptive and cathartic to be able to do that. But I want to approach it with humility, because it's not really me thinking that stuff. It's just like there's very ancient traditions. There's just very ancient wisdom which speaks directly into these themes. Anyway, so the dark night of the soul is a religious place. The awakening of the imagination is a religious place. The journey to God is a religious journey, religious process. And whether we language it that way or not, I think that phenomenologically, at the level of our human experience, we are all involved in a spiritual and religious, because I actually think that they mean the same thing. I don't necessarily agree with the distinction between the religious and the spiritual. Our lives are deeply spiritual and deeply religious. And so for me, the idea of like converting to Christianity seems like even a strange way to talk about it, because I've always been a religious being. It's just I've gradually come to a consciousness of how to organize that religious life, or orient it, or direct it, or to structure it. And I think that Christianity offers a profound response, a profound way of organizing our religiosity, let's say. But I mean, there's so much to be said about it that I'm not saying. This is just a glimpse of the story, really. So yeah, that's, I guess, my July update. YouTube, like this YouTube channel is like it's like a blog of mine, I guess. I see it as a blog. I'm breaking the fourth wall a little bit today and speaking directly to you instead of speaking about an idea or performing a poem, or like performing a speech or something like this. There's a very performative aspect to a lot of the content I've put out, and I'll continue that, I'm sure. But I wanted to be as real, I guess, with you as I can be, and just talk about what YouTube means to me, how I see it kind of fitting into the broader story of my life. And the problem with it as well is because it's my YouTube channel, there's a way in which the center of gravity can be about me and my thoughts, and just like there's an egoic danger to it, I guess. There's a prideful temptation in it to say like it's all about, I don't know, these things I find interesting or this and that. And there's an egocentrism which I guess I'm aware of, like, and it frightens me a bit. And so, I have been posting less content, and I very much want to continue with YouTube. I think it is powerful, and I know that I've touched people, and the people have found meaning in my content, and I'm really grateful for that. And I know that, and I really feel that the positives do outweigh the negatives in that sense, that it's overall a good thing for me to have the channel up and to share. It's just that my relationship to it is changing, and my relationship to even the ideas is changing. Because each time I share ideas, I'm coming from a particular limitation, and that limitation is my knowledge. That limitation is, what I understand, and I don't understand very many things. Like, I'm very ignorant, and so there's always that limitation haunting every piece of content I share, and I'm aware of that, and sometimes it cripples me. But like, there's so much wonderful material to share in the world, so many wonderful books and poems and ideas and thoughts that are just so beautiful. I find them so beautiful and so hopeful and so positive that I can't help but share them. And so I love that, and I would love to continue that. But I'd like to do so with humility, and I would like to do so within the context of a personal journey that is shifting and changing and transforming. Like, I'm a human being, and my relationship to ideas is changing. I've just talked about God, I've talked about Christianity, and that's very different from talking about alchemy and shamanism. It is different. And so I guess I'm evolving, I'm growing, I'm maturing. And the strange thing about having a YouTube channel is there's a feeling that I should, in some sense, stick to, like, talking about alchemy forever, or talking about whatever people have enjoyed already, just doing more of it and continuing to kind of like do what will help the channel grow and what people find really interesting. And whilst I'm really sensitive to the audience, I really want to understand how you connect with this material and like what thoughts you have. Like, I really want to understand that. At the same time, just the material has to come from an authentic place within me, and I kind of have to put that first as well. Like, just, what am I talking about? I'm talking about artistic freedom, I guess, or something like that. Like, the freedom to really change directions in my content and to explore in the same way I've always been exploring different ideas and different themes and different perspectives. And I really welcome any critique and any challenge to those perspectives. And I really want to dialogue and hear and respond to the things I say, because I don't think that, well, I'm sure that I've made many mistakes on this channel, and that my ignorance is palpable. Like, I'm sure that there's much that is flawed about this channel because it's a human project, but as I say, I feel like it's worthwhile. I feel like it's something worth continuing. And yeah, I don't know. I wanted to change things up a bit today and share a bit more of a personal update with you about my relationship to YouTube, my story so far, the kind of general direction of my story, direction of the content and stuff like that. Well, I didn't really say much about the general direction. I've got no idea what the direction will be, but it'll be about spiritual things, I'm sure. So yeah, maybe I'll end it there. And I look forward to sharing more, and I'd love to hear any comments as to if there's any questions or comments on my material. I'd love to hear them, so please do continue to share them. And yeah, I guess what I wanted to be as honest as I can be, and just to share that with you. So yeah, that's the update for July 2021. And thank you for listening. Appreciate it.